I never imagined I'd find myself in a situation like this, fighting for my own land. Of all things, our little farm wasn't grand or fancy, but it was ours. 5 peaceful acres tucked away at the edge of Blue Ridge Lane. It had rolling green fields that stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with wildflowers during springtime. We even planted rows of lavender along the fence line because Matt thought they looked pretty and smelled nice. The barn out back housed our chickens and goats, and every morning I'd wake up to their soft clucking and bleating. It was simple, quiet, and exactly what we needed after years of living in the chaos of the city. But peace doesn't last forever, does it? About 6 months ago, Mr. Callahan moved in 2 properties down. At first glance, he seemed harmless, a retired contractor who liked blasting loud music late into the night and hosting bonfires that lit up his backyard like a stadium. Honestly, I didn't think much of him beyond being mildly annoyed when his bass rattled our windows. But harmless quickly turned into something else entirely, something darker and more invasive than I ever expected. It started one crisp Saturday morning. I woke up earlier than usual, thanks to an unfamiliar rumbling sound outside. Groggy and curious, I shuffled to the window and pulled back the curtains. My heart sank instantly. There, right on the edge of our property near the shared fence line, was a crew pouring concrete over my once lush grass. Concrete, on my land. How was this possible? My mind raced as I threw on my boots and ran outside without thinking twice. "What's going on here?" I demanded, my voice shaking with disbelief. No one answered me directly. Instead, Mr. Callahan appeared from behind a bulldozer, clipboard in hand, looking as casual as if he were discussing the weather. "Oh, good morning," he said cheerfully, tipping an imaginary hat. "Just expanding my driveway. Needed some extra space for parking." "Your driveway?" I stammered, pointing toward the destruction. "This isn't your land. It's mine." He shrugged like it was no big deal, like ruining someone else's property was just part of his daily routine. "Minor miscalculation," he said with a dismissive wave. "Don't worry about it. You won't even notice it once it's done." Not notice it? How could I not notice it? That patch of land held memories. Picnics under the stars, lazy afternoons reading books beneath the shade of the oak tree, and countless mornings spent tending to plants I'd carefully nurtured over the years. And now, it was gone, swallowed by cold, gray concrete. I tried reasoning with him, pleading with him to stop, but he ignored me completely. When I threatened to call the authorities, he laughed, a deep, condescending chuckle, as if the idea of consequences amused him. "Go ahead," he said. "Call whoever you want. See if it makes a difference." His confidence unnerved me. Did he know something I didn't? Later that day, I did call the police, hoping they'd intervene. But instead of relief, I got frustration. They told me there wasn't much they could do unless I had proof that the land belonged to me. Proof. I'd lived here for years. Didn't that count for anything? As I hung up the phone, tears welled up in my eyes. This couldn't be real. This had to be some sort of nightmare. Yet, standing outside later that evening, staring at the freshly poured concrete glistening under the fading sunlight, I realized it was very, very real. The next few days felt surreal, like I was stuck in some twisted version of my own life, where nothing made sense anymore. Every time I looked out the window, the sight of that concrete slab mocked me. It wasn't just an eyesore. It was a constant reminder of how powerless I felt. How could someone walk onto my land, destroy part of it, and get away with it? And worse, why did everyone else seem so indifferent? I knew I couldn't let this slide. If I didn't fight back, what would stop Mr. Callahan from doing even more damage? So, after spending hours poring over old property documents and maps, I decided to take my case to the Homeowners Association, HOA. Surely they'd have some authority here. After all, their job was to maintain order in the neighborhood, right? I clung to that hope as I prepared for the meeting. When the day finally came, I arrived early, clutching a folder filled with evidence. Photos of the farm before the invasion, copies of our property deeds, and even a letter from a neighbor confirming where the boundary lines had always been. I rehearsed what I wanted to say in my head, trying to sound calm and rational despite the anger bubbling inside me. But as soon as I stepped into the room, I realized this wasn't going to be easy. Mrs. Harper, the HOA president, sat at the head of the table, her perfectly coiffed hair and sharp suit giving her an air of authority that intimidated most people. Beside her were other board members, including Mr. Callahan himself. Of course he'd be there. He probably knew exactly what I was planning. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, hands trembling slightly, and laid out my case as clearly as I could. "This is my land," I said firmly, showing them the documents. "Mr. Callahan has no right to build on it." But instead of siding with me, Mrs. Harper barely reacted. She glanced at her notes, adjusted her glasses, and then dropped a bombshell. "According to paperwork filed by Mr. Callahan," she said coolly, "that section of land belongs to him." "What?" I gasped, stunned. "That's impossible. I've lived here for years. This is my property." She shrugged, looking almost bored. "If you believe there's been a mistake, you'll need to hire a surveyor to confirm the boundaries." Her tone was dismissive, like she already knew I couldn't afford such an expense. Meanwhile, Mr. Callahan leaned back in his chair, smirking like he'd won. His confidence infuriated me. Did he really think he could just steamroll over me? Walking home that evening, I replayed the meeting in my mind, each moment making me angrier than the last. The HOA wasn't helping. They were practically enabling him. Was this how things worked around here? Could anyone with enough money and arrogance simply take what they wanted without consequences? It didn't seem fair. In fact, it felt downright cruel. Matt tried to reassure me when I got home, but even he was running out of comforting words. "We'll figure something out," he said, though I could hear the doubt in his voice. He suggested putting up signs or calling the zoning board, but none of those ideas felt strong enough. Signs wouldn't stop trucks from parking on the concrete, and another phone call to yet another bureaucratic office wouldn't magically fix everything overnight. As the days passed, Mr. Callahan wasted no time turning the slab into something even worse. An illegal parking lot. Trucks began showing up, idling for hours and filling the air with fumes. Neighbors complained about the noise and pollution, but no one did anything substantial to help. They were either too scared of Mr. Callahan or too apathetic to care. Either way, it left me feeling isolated and defeated. One afternoon, while sitting on the porch staring at the mess, I noticed a group of kids playing near the edge of the property. One of them picked a dandelion and held it up triumphantly, laughing as its seeds floated away in the breeze. Watching them reminded me of simpler times, before any of this happened. Before greed and entitlement turned my peaceful little corner of the world upside down. That's when it hit me. I couldn't give up. Not yet. Maybe the HOA wouldn't help, and maybe the law wouldn't move fast enough. But I still had options. I just needed to find them. Because if I gave up now, what message would that send? That it was okay for someone like Mr. Callahan to trample over others without facing repercussions. No, I refused to let him win. Not without a fight. The days that followed felt like a blur of frustration and helplessness. I couldn't shake the image of Mrs. Harper's dismissive expression or Mr. Callahan's smug grin from my mind. It was as if they had already decided the outcome before I even walked into that meeting room. But giving up wasn't an option, not when it meant letting someone like him get away with stealing part of my life. I started spending hours online, searching for answers. Forums, legal websites, anything that might give me a clue about what to do next. One thread caught my attention, a story eerily similar to mine. A woman in another state had faced the same issue, a neighbor encroaching on her land. And she'd eventually won by gathering evidence and taking her case public. Reading her post gave me hope, but it also made me realize how much work lay ahead. Determined not to let this go unanswered, I reached out to some of our neighbors. At first, I hesitated. What if they didn't want to get involved? What if they sided with Mr. Callahan or the HOA? But I reminded myself that staying silent wouldn't solve anything. So, one evening, I knocked on Sarah's door. She lived across the street and always seemed friendly enough, waving hello whenever she saw me tending to the lavender. "Hey," I said nervously when she opened the door. "Do you have a minute?" She nodded, stepping aside to let me in. After explaining the situation, I asked if she'd noticed anything unusual about the property lines over the years. To my relief, she didn't hesitate. "Oh, absolutely," she said. "That patch of land has always been yours. Everyone knows it. Mr. Callahan's just trying to pull a fast one." Her words reassured me, but I needed more than verbal support. I needed proof. Sarah agreed to write a statement confirming what she'd seen over the years and encouraged me to talk to others. Slowly, I began piecing together testimonies from neighbors who had lived here longer than I had. Each account strengthened my case, but it also highlighted how divided the community had become. Some neighbors were supportive, offering advice or sharing their own frustrations with the HOA. Others avoided me altogether, clearly uncomfortable with the conflict. And then there were those who whispered behind closed doors, speculating about whether I was causing trouble. It hurt, hearing people doubt me, but I tried to focus on the ones who stood by my side. Meanwhile, Mr. Callahan kept pushing his agenda. The trucks parked on the concrete lot grew louder and more frequent, their engines rumbling like a constant reminder of his presence. Exhaust fumes drifted into our yard, making it hard to sit outside without feeling nauseous. Matt joked bitterly that we should start charging them rent, but his laughter didn't reach his eyes. We both knew this was no laughing matter. One night, unable to sleep, I sat at the kitchen table flipping through old photos of the farm. There was one of Matt standing proudly beside the oak tree where we used to hang a hammock. Another showed the kids from down the street playing tag in the field during a summer barbecue. These memories weren't just pictures, they were pieces of our lives, stitched together by moments spent on that land. As I stared at the images, a thought struck me. Maybe the key to winning this fight wasn't just about proving ownership. Maybe it was about showing everyone what was at stake. The beauty, the history, the connection to something real in a world that often felt cold and impersonal. If I could make people see that, perhaps they'd understand why I couldn't back down. With renewed determination, I decided to take my story beyond the neighborhood. I wrote detailed posts on social media platforms, sharing photos of the damage and screenshots of my interactions with the HOA. I titled one post, "How My Neighbor Stole My Land," and "Why No One Will Help." Within hours, it gained traction. People from all over the country chimed in, offering advice, sharing similar experiences, and cheering me on. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't alone. Among the comments was a message from someone named Jerry, a retired lawyer specializing in property disputes. He offered to review my case pro bono, saying he believed I had a strong argument. His offer felt like a lifeline, pulling me out of the despair that had been threatening to drown me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to feel a flicker of optimism. Maybe, just maybe, justice was within reach. With Jerry's guidance, I started to see a path forward, a real plan instead of the chaotic mess of emotions and half-formed ideas I'd been juggling. He explained that winning this battle would require more than just proving ownership. It meant building an airtight case with solid evidence. That meant gathering every document, photo, and witness statement I could find. It sounded overwhelming, but Jerry reassured me. "You're not alone in this," he said over the phone. "We'll take it step by step." The first thing we did was hire a licensed surveyor. Jerry helped me draft a letter requesting financial assistance from the HOA, since they were partly responsible for allowing the situation to escalate. Predictably, Mrs. Harper rejected the request, claiming the HOA wasn't liable. But Jerry had anticipated this. He advised me to pay for the survey up front and seek reimbursement later through legal channels. It was a risk. I didn't have much savings, but I knew it was necessary. When the surveyor arrived, I followed him around like a shadow, watching as he measured and marked the boundaries with bright orange flags. The results confirmed what I already knew. The concrete slab and parking lot were entirely on my property. Holding the official report in my hands felt empowering, like finally having a weapon against Mr. Callahan's arrogance. But Jerry warned me not to celebrate yet. "This is just one piece of the puzzle," he said. "We need to build a narrative that leaves no room for doubt." Next, we focused on documenting everything: the noise, the pollution, the disruption to our daily lives. I began keeping a journal, noting each time trucks idled near the house or fumes made it unbearable to sit outside. Matt joined in too, snapping photos and recording videos whenever possible. One evening, we captured footage of a truck driver dumping trash behind the makeshift parking lot. It wasn't just careless, it was illegal. Adding this to our growing file gave us another angle to highlight how Mr. Callahan's actions went beyond mere entitlement. But as we built our case, tensions in the neighborhood reached a boiling point. Some neighbors, emboldened by our efforts, started speaking out more openly. Others, however, grew colder, avoiding eye contact or crossing the street when they saw me coming. Rumors spread about lawsuits and countersuits, painting me as either a hero fighting for justice or a troublemaker stirring up drama. I tried not to let it get to me, but it was hard not to feel isolated. One day, while hanging laundry in the backyard, I noticed something strange. Someone had spray-painted "Private P-R-O-P-E-R-T" across the side of the barn, but not in a way that supported me. Instead, it felt mocking, like someone was trying to taunt me. Beneath the words, scrawled in jagged letters, was a single phrase: "Back OFF." My stomach churned. Was this Mr. Callahan's doing, or someone else trying to scare me into silence? That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made me jump, convinced someone was lurking outside. Matt stayed awake with me, patrolling the windows with a flashlight. When dawn finally broke, neither of us had gotten any rest, but we refused to let fear dictate our next move. Jerry encouraged me to file a formal complaint with local zoning authorities, attaching all the evidence we'd gathered so far. He also suggested reaching out to a local news station, hoping media attention might pressure Mr. Callahan to back down. It was risky. Putting myself in the spotlight meant opening myself up to criticism, but it was also a chance to expose the truth. As I prepared for the interview, I thought about all the moments that had led me here: the quiet mornings on the farm, the shock of seeing my land destroyed, the countless hours spent fighting for what was right. This wasn't just about reclaiming property anymore. It was about standing up for fairness, integrity, and the simple belief that people shouldn't be allowed to trample over others without consequence. The reporter arrived on a cloudy afternoon, camera crew in tow. As I stood beside the concrete slab, recounting my story, I felt a mix of vulnerability and resolve. I didn't know how this would end, but one thing was certain: I was done backing down. The media coverage was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it brought attention to my fight in ways I hadn't imagined. The local news segment aired during prime time, and within hours, my phone buzzed nonstop with messages from neighbors, friends, and even strangers offering support. Some shared their own stories of dealing with difficult neighbors or unfair HOAs, while others simply said they admired my courage for standing up. It felt good to know I wasn't alone. But the attention also came with backlash. Mr. Callahan wasted no time retaliating. The next morning, I found a notice taped to my front door, a cease and desist letter accusing me of defamation and harassment. According to him, I was the aggressor, stirring up trouble where none existed. His lawyer's name was printed neatly at the bottom of the page. And for a moment, I felt the weight of his resources bearing down on me. How could I possibly compete with someone who seemed to have endless money and connections? Jerry assured me not to panic. "This is just a scare tactic," he explained over the phone. "They're trying to intimidate you into dropping the case. Don't let them." Still, the letter left me rattled. What if he sued me? What if this dragged on for years, draining every ounce of energy and savings I had. Matt noticed my unease and reminded me why we were doing this. "You've come too far to give up now," he said firmly. "We'll figure it out together." Determined to keep moving forward, I focused on gathering more evidence. Jerry suggested installing security cameras around the property, not only to document ongoing issues, but also to protect ourselves. The idea of being watched made me uncomfortable, but after the back OFF graffiti incident, I realized it was necessary. Matt handled the setup, positioning the cameras discreetly along the fence line and near the barn. Within days, they captured footage of trucks speeding recklessly through the makeshift parking lot and workers dumping debris on what was clearly my land. Each clip strengthened our case, giving us undeniable proof of the damage being done. Meanwhile, the neighborhood continued to fracture under the strain. Supporters left encouraging notes on our porch, while detractors muttered accusations whenever I passed by. One afternoon, Sarah stopped me as I walked back from checking the mail. "I heard people talking about you at the coffee shop," she admitted hesitantly. "Some think you're making a mountain out of a molehill." Her words stung, but I nodded understandingly. "I get it," I replied. "Not everyone sees things the same way, but I can't ignore what's happening. This isn't just about me. It's about setting a precedent. If he gets away with this, who's next?" Sarah sighed, looking conflicted. "You're braver than I'd be," she said softly before walking away. As the weeks went by, I began to feel like I was living two lives. During the day, I worked tirelessly on the case, meeting with Jerry, organizing documents, and responding to legal notices. At night, I lay awake replaying every conversation, every decision, wondering if I was doing enough. The stress took its toll. My hands trembled when I typed emails, and dark circles formed under my eyes from lack of sleep. Even simple tasks, like watering the lavender or feeding the chickens, felt exhausting. Then, one evening, something unexpected happened. A group of neighbors invited me to a secret meeting at Sarah's house. When I arrived, I was surprised to see familiar faces, people who had previously stayed silent now sitting around her dining table, ready to help. They offered to share their own experiences, write letters to the HOA, and even testify if needed. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. "We're tired of letting bullies run this neighborhood," one neighbor said. It's time someone stood up. Their support gave me strength, but I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Mr. Callahan wasn't going to back down without a fight, and neither was I. As I drove home that night, the headlights cutting through the darkness, I reminded myself of one thing. Justice might take time, but it was worth fighting for. No matter how hard it got, I couldn't and wouldn't give up. The turning point came on a chilly Tuesday morning, when the legal battle finally moved from behind the scenes, strategizing to full-blown action. Armed with the evidence we painstakingly gathered, survey reports, security footage, neighbor testimonies, and even the toxicology report showing elevated pollution levels near our home, we filed a formal complaint against Mr. Callahan and the HOA. Jerry had warned me that this step would escalate things. But I was ready, or at least I thought I was. Within hours of submitting the paperwork, the neighborhood erupted into chaos. Mr. Callahan didn't waste any time retaliating. He posted flyers around Blue Ridge Lane, accusing me of fabricating lies and stirring up drama for attention. The flyers featured grainy photos of my property, misleading captions, and bold red letters screaming "False accusations." It was as if he was trying to turn public opinion against me, painting himself as the victim. To my dismay, some neighbors fell for it. One afternoon, while walking to the mailbox, I overheard two women chatting by their driveway. "She's just causing trouble," one said, gesturing toward my house. "I mean, look at all those cameras she put up. Who does that unless they're paranoid?" Her words stung more than I expected. I wanted to defend myself, to explain why I'd installed the cameras, and why this fight mattered so much. But I bit my tongue. Arguing wouldn't change their minds. It might even make things worse. Instead, I kept my head down and focused on what really mattered, proving my case in court. Meanwhile, Matt and I worked tirelessly to prepare for the hearing. Every evening, our dining table became a makeshift war room, cluttered with papers, highlighters, and sticky notes. We reviewed every detail, rehearsed potential questions, and double-checked facts until our eyes blurred. Despite the exhaustion, there was a strange sense of camaraderie between us. This fight wasn't just mine anymore. It was ours. And knowing we were in it together made the weight feel slightly lighter. As the court date approached, tensions reached a fever pitch. One night, someone threw a rock through our living room window. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but the sound of shattering glass sent both of us scrambling out of bed, hearts racing. When we saw the jagged hole and the shattered remnants scattered across the floor, anger bubbled inside me. But also fear. Was this how far they were willing to go? Matt called the police, who dusted for fingerprints and promised to investigate, though I doubted anything would come of it. That same night, Sarah texted me, urging us to stay safe. "This is getting dangerous," she wrote. "Don't hesitate to ask for help if you need it." Her kindness reminded me that not everyone had turned against us. In fact, several neighbors stepped up in ways I hadn't anticipated. A retired teacher named Mrs. Patel offered to babysit our dog during tense moments, ensuring we weren't distracted. Another neighbor, Tom, volunteered to patrol the street at night, keeping an eye out for suspicious activity. Their support gave me strength, reminding me that I wasn't fighting alone. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. Dressed in my best outfit, I sat nervously in the courtroom alongside Jerry, clutching a folder filled with our evidence. Across the aisle, Mr. Callahan looked smug, flanked by his high-priced attorney. As the judge listened to both sides, I did my best to remain composed, speaking clearly and confidently about everything we'd endured. I showed the survey maps, played the security footage, and read aloud statements from neighbors who supported us. For the first time in months, I felt like I was being heard. When it was Mr. Callahan's turn to speak, his lawyer tried to discredit our evidence, calling it circumstantial and emotionally charged. But the judge didn't seem convinced. By the end of the session, I could tell something had shifted. The tide was turning, not in loud, dramatic ways, but subtly, quietly, like the first rays of dawn breaking through a long, dark night. As we left the courthouse, Matt squeezed my hand. "We did everything we could," he said softly. "Whatever happens next, we'll face it together." For the first time in a long time, I believed him. The verdict came 2 weeks later, delivered on a rainy afternoon that seemed to mirror the emotional storm we'd been living through. I sat in the courtroom with Matt by my side, clutching his hand so tightly I thought I might leave marks. The judge cleared her throat and began reading the decision. Every word felt like it stretched into eternity, each syllable heavy with meaning. "In light of the evidence presented," she said finally, "this court finds in favor of the plaintiff. The disputed land is confirmed to belong to the rightful owner, and Mr. Callahan is ordered to remove all unauthorized structures within 30 days. Furthermore, penalties will be imposed for violations of zoning regulations." Relief washed over me in waves, so powerful it nearly brought me to tears. We had won. After months of sleepless nights, endless stress, and countless moments of doubt, justice had prevailed. But as the judge banged her gavel and dismissed the case, I realized this victory wasn't just about reclaiming my land. It was about proving that standing up for what's right can make a difference, no matter how daunting the odds may seem. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us, eager for quotes and reactions. I smiled faintly but kept my answers brief. This fight wasn't about revenge or attention. I told them. It was about protecting my home, and hopefully encouraging others to speak up when they see something wrong. As the cameras flashed and microphones jostled for position, I caught sight of Sarah and a few other neighbors standing at the edge of the crowd, clapping quietly. Their presence meant more to me than any headline ever could. But the aftermath wasn't without its challenges. Over the next few weeks, workers arrived to dismantle the concrete slab and restore the damaged land. Watching jackhammers tear apart the gray expanse felt cathartic, like undoing a scar that had marred my life for far too long. Still, the process dragged on, delayed by bad weather and bureaucratic red tape. And then there was Mr. Callahan himself, who remained eerily silent throughout the cleanup. His house sat empty most days, blinds drawn shut like a fortress under siege. Rumor had it he was planning to sell and move away, though I never saw him again after the trial. While the physical scars on the property slowly healed, the emotional ones took longer to fade. Some nights, I still woke up startled, convinced someone was lurking outside. Other times, I'd catch myself glancing nervously at the fence line, half expecting trouble to reappear. Matt reassured me whenever these moments struck. "It's over," he'd say gently. "You don't have to keep looking over your shoulder." Yet despite the lingering unease, there were brighter moments too. Neighbors who had once avoided me now waved warmly when they saw me tending to the lavender or feeding the chickens. A few even stopped by to apologize for doubting me, admitting they hadn't realized how serious the situation truly was. "You showed us what it means to stand your ground," one of them said sincerely. It wasn't an easy reconciliation, but it gave me hope that our community could heal. As spring returned to Blue Ridge Lane, new growth sprouted where the concrete had once been. Wildflowers bloomed along the fence line, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the gray emptiness that had dominated the space for so long. One day, while planting fresh seeds near the oak tree, I noticed a group of kids playing tag in the field, a scene straight out of my memories before everything went wrong. Their laughter echoed across the yard, filling me with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. Standing there, hands caked with dirt and heart full of gratitude, I realized something important. Fighting for what you love changes you. It teaches resilience, courage, and the value of standing firm even when everyone else seems to have given up. This battle had cost me dearly: sleepless nights, strained relationships, and countless hours of effort. But it had also given me something invaluable: proof that fairness and justice are worth fighting for. And yet, as I looked toward Mr. Callahan's empty house, its windows dark and silent, I couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't entirely finished. Maybe it never would be. But for now, I chose to focus on the present. The fields growing green again, the support of true friends, and the quiet joy of knowing I'd done everything I could to protect what mattered most.